When 35-year-old Pazuzu Algarad was arrested in October 2014 in connection with several unsolved disappearances, nobody in his community of Clemmons, North Carolina, was surprised. Algarad had a long history of mental health issues, and rumours about his house of horrors, filled with death, decay, and blood, had been doing the rounds for years. But his mother noted that her son was far from a bogeyman. He was just a man who didn't get the help he desperately needed. Pazuzu Algarad had once been John Alexander Lawson, a perfectly ordinary American boy. So what prompted Algarad to become a cold-blooded killer? How did he wind up on this grisly path, surrounded by neglect, self-harm, and rot? In this documentary, we will attempt to unravel some of the mystery surrounding this case, as we examine the disturbing story of Pazuzu Algarad and his house of horrors. Pazuzu Algarad was born John Alexander Lawson in San Francisco, California, on August 12, 1978. The details of much of Algarad's early life are hazy at best. Documentarian Patricia Gillespie, who created The Devil You Know about Algarad and his crimes, stated, "He told people he was from Iraq. He told people his father was some high priest. But the people who knew him as a child described him as a little off-kilter, a little emotional." The best information we have about Algarad's early life comes in the form of a psychiatric evaluation he was forced to undergo in 2010 after being charged with accessory after the fact in a murder case. The evaluation was accidentally leaked to the media by Forsyth County Clerk's office, and within it, Algarad claimed that he was born to unmarried parents, never met his father, and that he had an older half-sister whom he also never met. He was raised by his mother and her relatives, and observed that they were not financially stable. In his teen years, he moved with his mother to North Carolina. His mother, however, Cynthia James, has stated that actually she was married to Algarad's father at the time of his birth. She clarified that they moved to North Carolina when he was just 2 years old and separated when he was around 8. Algarad's father reportedly dealt with alcoholism as well as substance abuse issues. He ultimately wound up spending his life in and out of jail and could not financially support the family. Cynthia remarried when her son was 12, but the union was short-lived. In school, he had no major issues, but he struggled with maths and as a result required extra help. His agoraphobia reportedly developed around the age of 16. During the evaluation, Algarad denied being abused or neglected growing up, and he stated that he was unaware of mental health issues within his family. He did, however, admit that he had an uncle who had substance abuse issues and got into trouble with the law. According to Algarad himself, he dropped out of school in the 9th grade, around the age of 15, because that's when the phobia around people started. He had been a poor student before he dropped out, and confessed that he had been hospitalized for mental health problems at the age of 13. Reportedly, Cynthia had sent him to receive help because he was getting into trouble. He also stated that he had started drinking alcohol at this age. Algarad stated that he had been diagnosed at the time with agoraphobia, noting that when he was outside his house, his anxiety gets so high, I faint. He was also diagnosed with schizophrenia, because I get paranoid someone's out to get me, and what he referred to as manic depression, or what is more commonly known today as bipolar disorder. He stated that he suffered from mood swings as a result, adding, "but not over little things." Algarad further observed that he'd never experienced suicidal ideation. It was also noted in his evaluation that Algarad was a heavy drinker as an adult, claiming to consume a 12-pack of beer daily, as it just calms me down, and he admitted that he suffered from the shakes if he stopped drinking for an extended period of time. Further confusing his report, though, was the fact that he'd struggled to keep his story straight. He seemed to give conflicting statements about the treatment he'd received over the years in regards to his mental health. While earlier he claimed to have not been prescribed medication and that he had only received treatment as a teenager, he later stated that he first received mental health care at the age of 26 because that's when the agoraphobia started kicking in pretty strong. However, in another conversation, he claimed that he had been involved in a treatment program several years before this, but dropped out due to transportation issues. Though he was prescribed medications around this time, he stopped taking them because they made him feel like a zombie. Notably, at the age of 23, Algarad was arrested for driving drunk. He had also been arrested in his 20s for assaulting a woman. Prior to his 2010 arrest, he had only spent 1 day in jail. Following the move to North Carolina in his childhood, Algarad and his mother settled in the small village of Clemmons in Forsyth County, which is said to be a small but religious community, where most residents attend church every week. Furthermore, it is an area ravaged by unemployment and a lack of good prospects, with young people often struggling to find not just work, but any form of entertainment within the town's boundaries. Although Cynthia was aware of her son's issues and she attempted to get him psychiatric help, the funds soon dried up and she was unable to pay for him to keep seeing professionals. She would later state, "You gotta remember the good things, and I block out any of the bad things. He wasn't by any means an angel, but he wasn't a bad person or a bogeyman, or whatever phrases people have called him." Beginning in the mid-1990s, locals soon became aware of the reputation of Algarad, who was still officially John Lawson, but referred to himself as Pazuzu, after the demon from The Exorcist. It wasn't until 2002 that he legally changed his name. He reportedly attempted to make himself look as intimidating as possible, getting face tattoos, filing his teeth down into points, something he allegedly did while high on meth. And he openly bragged about how he regularly made animal sacrifices. He even claimed he could control the weather. According to his 2010 psychiatric evaluation, Algarad said that since the age of 17, he'd been practicing a Sumerian religion, though he admitted that he was the only person who practiced it. He became quite concerned during his evaluation that he would be unable to perform a necessary ritual during the Black Moon, with his mother adding that it was an animal sacrifice he was needed to complete. She reportedly worried that he'd kill himself if he couldn't carry it out. Meanwhile, at some point during his adulthood, Algarad stopped bathing. By the time of his evaluation, he stated that he only bathed once a year and that he virtually never brushed his teeth. He claimed that personal hygiene stripped the body of its defenses in warding off infection and illness. While in his early 20s, Algarad spent a short time working for a landscaping company, but soon became unemployed, relying on disability checks he received for his agoraphobia diagnosis. He soon took up residence at 2749 Nob Hill Drive with his mother, which became the social hub for misfits and those on the fringes of society. By this time, his reputation as an odd and ill-tempered man was impossible to escape, but people still gravitated towards him. Nate Anderson, a self-admitted follower of Algarad before the murders, described him as having a twisted sort of charisma, adding that though it wouldn't appeal to everyone, it certainly appealed to those who struggled to fit in with mainstream society. He later noted, "His aura is very intoxicating. You just feel free and powerful in his presence," before adding, "He controlled by manipulation. You all worship law and order? I'm going to be an anarchist. File my teeth down to points and get tattoos all over my face." Chad Nance, meanwhile, the editor of the Camel City Dispatch, added to this point, observing that Algarad seemed to become the stark opposite of the intensely religious community of Clemmons, stating, "Everyone identifies with the church, so he became the devil. He became a Satanist. Even the name Pazuzu, I mean, come on, it's the name of the demon in The Exorcist. What's the biggest, scariest thing? It's Satan. Chad added that it was clear that Algarad had a very carefully curated persona, which was a little mixture of Manson, throw in a little Anton LaVey, a little 1980s heavy metal, 666 type stuff, and there you go. Piling on even more fuel to the fire, he pointed out that Algarad even adopted more Arabic clothing, including headwear, following the September 11th attacks. One acquaintance of Algarad's noted he was basically a Charles Manson of Clemmons. Documentarian Patricia Gillespie echoed similar sentiments, noting he wasn't accepted. Step by step, he started to do more extreme things, like sacrificing the animals and the creation of this mythos around himself. The fact that he chose to take elements of Luciferianism and Islam, two religions that are incredibly discordant, and put them together shows that he was exactly reacting to his Christian post-9/11 community. So he keeps upping the ante and upping the ante. David Adams, who'd been friends with Algarad for a decade when he spoke to the crew filming The Devil You Know, recalled, "When I first met him, we mainly just hung out. Maybe did a little bit of heroin now and then, just a shit ton of drinking and cut ourselves in each other, maybe drank the blood of a bird or so. Just all around having a good time." He stated that another reason people tended to hang around with Algarad was because there was no rules in his house. Anything went. People could destroy property, participate in orgies, and start violent altercations, and it didn't matter. Nobody would call the police, nobody would make reports. Anything went, as far as Algarad saw it. His home on Nob Hill Drive was, by all accounts, filthy, in part because of his lack of rules. Nate Anderson recalled that the building always smelled of urine and rotting matter. There was unbearably loud black metal playing at all hours of the day, and partygoers were constantly fighting and adding to the filth by urinating on the carpet or defecating in the corners of the room. Chad Nance added that he could see the appeal of the rule-free parties. While people struggled in the town to find work and scrape together enough money to pay rent, it was likely a refreshing change of pace to be in an environment where destruction was encouraged, judgment and pressure were non-existent, and attendees were freely supplied with drugs. Algarad also gained himself a reputation for the way he often preyed on older teens. More often than not, his girlfriends were barely out of high school and were vulnerable and inexperienced. Amber Bubbles Birch was one such girlfriend, who just finished high school when she met Algarad. Her best friend, Caddy, recalled that Birch did a total 180 after meeting Algarad, becoming a completely different version of herself. She stopped showering, she shaved off her eyebrows, and she filed her teeth into points, supposedly to make it easier for her to bite into animals. Caddy stated the pair frequently cut each other to drink their blood, and also consumed that of animals as well. When Caddy met Algarad for the first time in July 2009, their interaction was chilling. She observed the horrific smell of his house and told him that his home smells like death. He responded by laughing and telling her it was the bodies in the basement. Over the years, though, it wasn't just these outlandish and grotesque parties and the constant string of fresh-faced girls he dated that caused the townspeople to talk. There were also the rumours of death, maiming, and other extreme violence. David Adams felt that Algarad's power came from fear, claiming he was always telling people stories of hunting and maiming people. He frequently bragged of shooting and stabbing and killing the unhoused, but nobody ever really believed him, especially not David, who stated, "I just thought he was trying to look cool." On one occasion, Algarad told him that he had someone locked in his basement and asked that if he saw someone emerge from the basement, make sure they didn't leave. David thought nothing of it. It was just another of Algarad's elaborate, fantastical stories. And when he didn't see anyone or hear anything from the basement, he assumed he was right. Similarly, a woman named Bianca Heath, who claimed to have spent a month living with Algarad in 2005, told the Huffington Post, "Paz told everyone about the graves, but I never believed him. I'm sure no one else believed him either. He laughed about the skeletal remains when telling the story on why he did what he did. The stories that Algarad picked up two prostitutes at two separate locations, killed them and ate them, before burning some of the remains and burying the rest. Josh Wetzler was 22 when he met Stacey Carter, who was 25 and traveling through Olympia, Washington, in 1999. Reflecting on how she'd fallen for Josh, Stacey recalled that he was an animal lover, a horseback rider, fun, outgoing, and likable. Shortly after their meeting, the pair became inseparable, hiring a van to travel around the country. Josh was, by all accounts, a gentleman who often befriended social outcasts and misfits. Eventually, he and Stacey settled down, purchasing a piece of land together where they planned to build a horse farm and rehabilitation centre. But in 2007, they began falling short on mortgage payments, and adding to their financial difficulties was the fact that Stacey had fallen pregnant. The couple lost the farm in 2008, and in the subsequent months, the pair's relationship began to disintegrate. While Stacey took up work on another horse farm, Josh moved into a trailer and, in financial desperation, began considering the idea of selling recreational drugs, marijuana and mushrooms, nothing more. But he made the mistake of having mushrooms sent to him in the mail, and an investigation by law enforcement led them to his door, where they found the illegal substances. Josh was convicted of a felony in February 2009. His shocking arrest was considered an enormous story in Clemmons, and he struggled to find work after he was convicted. Stacey last saw her ex-partner in July 2009. That summer, he spent time with their son, and the former couple spent time with mutual friends and family over a cookout. Josh went missing shortly afterwards. Stacey didn't report it at first because she thought he was avoiding his probation officer and had cut contact with her in order to do so. But as the months went by, Josh's mother grew worried. She didn't hear from her son on her birthday or at Christmas. Furthermore, Stacey noticed he'd failed to reach out to their son. In early 2010, Stacey realized that not even his probation officer was looking for him, so she reported him missing on February the 15th, 2010. Local police revealed that they'd found his car in July 2009, dumped in his apartment complex car park with the key still in the ignition, but no officer had thought to reach out to his family. Notably, before Josh was even reported missing, local rumours began to circulate that claimed a man named Pazuzu was responsible for his demise. On September the 24th, 2009, an anonymous tipster told the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office that a Clemmons man named Pazuzu had shot and buried a man in his back garden. Despite the lead, however, investigators did not search Algarad's house. Police would later claim that these tips were not enough for probable cause, despite the fact that at least a handful of tips had come in pointing the finger in the same direction, at Pazuzu Algarad. Another local soon came forward, Sylvia LeBeau, who told The Devil You Know that Josh's story is as follows: that Algarad and his girlfriend, Amber Birch, trapped him in the basement of Algarad's home, starved him for days, and cut off his extremities before burying him in the garden. Sylvia claimed that she'd been forced to watch a home video of Birch and Algarad, and the latter was wearing a blood-stained bandana that had belonged to Josh. Concerned by the rumours that she was hearing, Sylvia attempted to speak with regulars at Algarad's house and record their answers, looking for information that could prove that the rumour was true, or at least give police enough reason to search the home. Though she did go to the sheriff's office with what she knew, Sylvia was not taken seriously. In May of 2010, Algarad's mother pressed charges against him for domestic assault after he choked her into unconsciousness. However, she decided not to pursue charges, and nothing more came from this. 5 months later, in October, he and a man named Nicholas Rizzi were arrested in connection with the shooting death of a man named Joseph Chandler, a 30-year-old legally blind individual who'd been reported missing several months earlier. His body had been found on a boat ramp by investigators on June the 7th in Donaher Park in Yadkin County. Joseph's mother believes her son was purposely chosen. She stated that her son was out when he bumped into the two men at a store. He subsequently got into the car with Algarad and Rizzi, who drove him to the Donaher Park. Joseph was shot while lighting up a cigarette. However, Algarad and Rizzi claimed the whole incident was an accident. In March 2011, Rizzi pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was given 13 months behind bars. Algarad was charged with accessory after the fact, at which time he was forced to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, the same one we discussed earlier. The evaluation ultimately diagnosed Algarad with several mental health issues, including alcohol dependence, panic disorder, with agoraphobia, and schizotypal personality disorder. He was handed several medications and recommended to undergo treatment for substance abuse. Treatment for the latter and his mental health issues were recommended to be mandatory parts of his supervised release plan. Algarad eventually decided to plead guilty, and he was given a suspended sentence and 5 years probation. Not much is known about Tommy Welch, Algarad's final victim. He is described as a working-class man who struggled to make ends meet, but loved spending time with his family. He also had a deep interest in cars and was the oldest of 3 siblings. Around the time of his disappearance, in October 2009, 3 months after Josh went missing, he had been planning to meet up with family at his brother's apartment in Clemmons. He was last seen at around 7:30 p.m. one day in early October while at a petrol station, and then he simply disappeared. Matt Flowers is a former friend of Algarad's who described him on The Devil You Know as a man who wasn't going anywhere and never wanted to do anything positive, adding that he was highly evil. After high school, Matt joined the military, and by the time he returned home, everything was different. His ex-girlfriend, Dixie Ross, was now one of Algarad's fiancées, and when she met up with Matt in November 2009, she told him the story of how Amber Birch called her to the house one night to demand that she help them bury a body, or else. After wrestling with his conscience, Matt filed an anonymous report to the police, leaving Dixie's name out of the story. In February 2010, the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office conducted a search of Algarad's Nob Hill Drive property, but found no evidence of a murder. It would take another 4 years before a thorough enough examination of the property took place that investigators actually discovered human remains. On October 5, 2014, authorities started their search by looking at the garden at the rear of the house, where they noticed disturbances amongst the earth and grass. The first skeleton was found that afternoon, and a second body followed shortly afterwards. The rest of the house was searched, with officers wearing masks and full body suits to protect themselves from the rancid stench of the home. On October 10th, news broke that 3 people had been arrested in connection with the discovery of the bodies: 35-year-old Algarad, 24-year-old Amber Birch, and 28-year-old Crystal Matlock. Algarad and Birch were charged with murder and accessory after the fact in connection with Tommy's case, while Matlock was charged as an accessory for helping to bury Josh's body. 3 days later, the bodies were identified as belonging to the missing men, Tommy Welch and Josh Wetzler. A report by the Winston-Salem Journal noted that the police investigation led authorities to believe that Josh had lived with Algarad at his Clemmons home for 2 to 3 weeks before he was shot to death in July 2009. Cynthia would later state, "He didn't have anywhere to stay. They turned his heat off or something, and he asked if he could sleep on the couch. I didn't have a problem with it. I enjoyed John having friends." Meanwhile, Tommy was picked up by Birch and Algarad at a petrol station where the pair hung out together and drank alcohol. Law enforcement was unable to find a concrete motive for the murders, but reportedly, Tommy was sitting on the sofa before Birch grabbed a .22 caliber rifle and shot him twice in the back of the head. 3 months earlier, Algarad had used that same weapon to kill Josh, shooting him 3 times in the head and 4 times in the torso. His body remained in the house for weeks before Birch returned home from South Carolina to help him bury it. Birch ultimately pled guilty to second-degree murder, armed robbery, and accessory after the fact to murder. The prosecution had alleged that not only had she killed Tommy, but that she'd helped bury Josh. Due to a plea agreement her defense team had arranged, Birch was given 3 consecutive prison sentences that totaled 30 years and 8 months to 39 years and 2 months. According to Julie Boyer, Birch's lawyer, Algarad physically and psychologically abused Birch throughout the entirety of their relationship, and that on more than one occasion, law enforcement had been called to the house to respond to domestic disputes and reported violence. Another friend of Birch's recalled that before meeting Algarad, Birch attended Bible study sessions, but that afterwards, she fell into his lifestyle and fell into his identity. Boyer added that her client likely had mental health issues, noting that part of Algarad's sentencing in the Joseph Chandler case involved him attending treatment for his mental illnesses, and that Birch took him to and from these sessions. On one occasion, one of the professionals there suggested that she too seek treatment, although it doesn't appear she ever did. Boyer claimed that Birch regretted her actions, although she has never said anything publicly. Crystal Matlock, meanwhile, pled guilty to conspiracy to accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. She was given 3 years and 2 months to 4 years and 10 months in prison. At around 3 a.m. on October the 28th, 2015, while Algarad was still awaiting trial, he was found unresponsive in his cell at Central Prison in Raleigh. Though medical staff attempted resuscitation, it failed, and he was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. Rumours soon began circulating amongst Clemmons residents that Algarad had wounded his own arm using his filed-down teeth and broken an artery. Unfortunately, law enforcement didn't provide much more clarity on the situation. At the press conference announcing Algarad's death, little information was given to the journalists present. Chief Deputy Brad Stanley of the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office stated that Algarad had a wound to one of his arms, and added that a safekeeping order prevented specifics of Algarad's death and the case from being discussed. Authorities were unable to answer questions from journalists about whether or not there was suspicious circumstances, what his behaviour was like leading to his death, and whether or not he'd previously made attempts on his life. Furthermore, while Algarad's cell was reportedly searched from top to bottom, no weapon or instrument was found. His autopsy indicated that his teeth were damaged, leading to the theory that indeed he had punctured his own artery with his teeth and bled to death, which led many to question why he had been left alone to carry out a task that would have taken some time. Josh's mother, Martha, stated her disappointment that she'd never receive answers as to why her son was targeted, and added, "That only proves to me that he knew what he'd done and that he didn't want to be responsible for his actions." To this day, many questions remain around Algarad's death, but that's not the only thing that emerged that year that also raised eyebrows. It was revealed during Amber Birch's hearing that Algarad's mother, Cynthia, had been getting ready to go to work when she heard a bang. When she left her room, she saw her son standing, holding a gun at Josh's body. Instead of contacting the police, however, Cynthia decided to go back to her room and continue getting ready. When she emerged again, her son reportedly told her that he would make sure Josh was dead. Furthermore, detectives stated that following Tommy Welch's murder in October, Cynthia saw Birch and another woman carrying his body into the back garden. After the search warrants were unsealed in 2011, it was revealed that Cynthia had, in fact, reported Tommy's murder to the police, pointing the finger firmly at her son's girlfriend, Amber Birch. But still, authorities stated they did not have enough evidence to charge Birch. Though they asked Cynthia, the owner of the house, to do a search of her property, she declined to let them do so. Investigators believe she was trying to protect her son. As a result, no further action was taken. It's unclear to this day why Cynthia has never been charged in connection with the two deaths. A former friend of Cynthia's, who knew her son when he was just a little boy, believes that she is responsible for how Algarad turned out. She fiercely disagreed when Cynthia put Algarad in a mental health facility at the age of 13, especially because his stepfather was reportedly abusive, and the friend felt that Cynthia was raising him in a bad environment. Additionally, she knew that Cynthia was a heavy drinker and would frequently entertain men at her house or even leave Algarad alone to fend for herself for long periods of time. Following the arrest of Birch, Matlock and Algarad, Cynthia reportedly left home on Nob Hill Drive that she shared with her son and laid low. The property was demolished in April of 2015 after it was deemed uninhabitable. While many residents were happy to see the House of Horrors gone, with one resident fearing that if Algarad had got out of prison, he'd come right back to it. Others, including Chad Nance, criticised how fast the demolition happened. He felt that the community and the police were deflecting from how badly the case was handled, pointing out that many locals seemed to know that Algarad was a criminal, but few went to the police, and those who did were not believed by law enforcement, who waited 5 whole years before finally searching his back garden. Chad stated, "As a society, we are failing. And I mean, the answers aren't easy to come by. But one thing I do know, if you see somebody totally self-destructing or destroying themselves or others, you gotta face it head on." Josh's ex-partner, Stacy, expressed similar views, adding, "When Pazuzu was young, there were people that were well aware that there was a problem. How did he fall through the cracks?" In the weeks following the arrest of Algarad and his accomplices, mainstream media was quick to label the trio evil and reference their Satan-worshipping ways, their animal sacrifices and their blood rituals, to the point that it all became a bit of a circus. Documentarian Patricia Gillespie noted, "Some outlets were calling it a sex cult, and it's like, well, it wasn't really a sex cult. It was a bunch of people living in a dirty house. It was a bunch of girls that were more or less being abused to the point that they abused other people. Because they were left in a dirty house with a lot of drugs, they were hit and threatened. I think it's easier to say, oh look, the brides of Satan, than it is to point to systemic misogyny and a general disregard for poor people." Her finished Vice documentary, The Devil You Know, focuses more on the people left behind in the aftermath of Algarad's death and the struggles they face, whether it's a result of PTSD, alcoholism, or drug addiction. Both Gillespie and Chad Nance have pointed out that part of the reason Algarad went free for so long was due to failures in the system, from the police disbelieving those who came forward and dismissing people like Josh and Tommy as wanderers who just hadn't come home yet, to the fact that Algarad may have not become so violent in adulthood had his mental health been correctly cared for and treated in his youth. Patricia added, "We let those people disappear, but we rarely look at the shrapnel of violence that embeds itself in the larger community, and I think that deserves a look." Those who knew Algarad believe that he may have more victims. Whether or not he does, it's clear that the end result of his actions was incredibly destructive for the small community of Clemmons who have been left to pick up the pieces. The loved ones of Tommy, Joseph, and Josh will likely never know why they were targeted. Martha Wetzler stated that Algarad took the coward's way out when he died, and added, "Let's hope he burns in hell."